Hey everybody, we're going to be starting our food chemistry unit. As you know, we just covered our organic chemistry unit, which is the study of all living things. And the thing about the food that we eat is it is also living things, whether it be plants or animals, all of that is going to be considered to be organic. So now we're going to take the organic chemistry that we just learned and apply it to something that we can all relate to, which is food, because we all eat. So food chemistry, the main thing that we're going to be focusing on is the three main macromolecules. So when you're looking at a food label, generally it breaks it down into fat, carbs, and protein. And these are your three main macromolecules. And what I want you to be able to walk away from this unit is to be able to do is basically have a chemical scientific understanding of what these three main macromolecules are and how our bodies digest and process them and use them. Just so you can walk away being a little bit more informed moving forward. Because at least for me, before I started teaching this unit, I did not really understand a food label. I thought I did. That's what was kind of interesting, is I thought I understood, but then after getting into it, I realized I didn't as much. So that's what I'm kind of hoping for you guys, is to kind of take this information and then maybe apply it to your everyday lives. The very first macromolecule we're going to be talking about is going to be carbohydrates. So kind of this part of the nutrition label here. So talking about what a carbohydrate is, what dietary fiber is, what sugars are, the difference between them structurally, and then how the structure of those different carbohydrates then affects how our bodies use and process them. So starting with carbohydrates, as the name kind of implies, carbohydrates are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, which are the only three elements that we've talked about up until this point in regards to organic molecules. So carbohydrates are made up of those three elements, and there are some different words that can be used to describe a carbohydrate, and you've probably heard of these before. One of them is a saccharide. So a saccharide is another word that's also used for carbohydrates, and another word is actually sugars. And so when I think of sugar, I usually think of like the table sugar that's in my pantry that I use to make cookies, right? But sugars is really a more all-encompassing word that talks about every single carbohydrate there is. The sugar in our cabinets is a sugar, but from here on out, sugars is going to encompass all carbohydrates. And so the stuff in our pantry, we're going to call that sucrose. That's like its special name. So when we're talking about carbohydrates, there are three different types of carbohydrates, mono, di, and poly. Generally, we refer to these as monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. So we throw that word saccharide at the end of each of these. And so basically what that means is, you've heard these words before, right? Mono, di, and poly. So a monosaccharide is a carb, so it's a carbohydrate, composed of one sugar molecule. Now, I haven't told you what a sugar molecule is yet. I'll get that here in just a second. But that's going to be your basic definition. Is a monosaccharide is a carbohydrate composed of one sugar molecule. So if that's a monosaccharide, I bet you can imagine a disaccharide is again, a carbohydrate composed of two sugar molecules, because the prefix di means two. So a disaccharide is a carb composed of two sugar molecules, and then that means a polysaccharide is a carb composed of many sugar molecules. And many, in regards to this, is like in the 100s. So not like 3 or 4 or 10 even, but like hundreds of sugar molecules. So mono is just one, di is two, poly is many, and when we're saying many, we're talking like hundreds. And the number that we're referring to here is sugar molecules. So what is a sugar molecule? A sugar molecule, and I'll show you a picture of one here in just a second, but for your definition, a sugar molecule is a 5 to 6 carbon ring with alcohol functional groups on it. So a sugar molecule is a 5 to 6 carbon ring with alcohols on it. So thinking back to our organic chemistry unit, so imagine a shape, so like a cyclopentane or cyclohexane. So that's a 5 to 6 carbon ring. And then alcohols, if you remember, are those OH functional groups. So here are some pictures of one right now. So these are all examples of carbohydrates. And we just learned that there's monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides in relationship to those. So what I have up here, these are the examples of my monosaccharides. So all 3 of these are a monosaccharide. And if you remember, a monosaccharide is composed of 1 sugar molecule. So fructose, glucose, and galactose are all monosaccharides. Notice here we've got the carbon ring, okay, so you can see like the shape from before, and then you've got all of these OHs hanging off of it, these alcohol functional groups. So that is what I mean by sugar molecule, and by a monosaccharide I mean we've just got one of them. Over here, I've got a picture of a disaccharide. Notice I have 2 of them. They're bonded and they're connected, and that's what makes them be 1 full molecule. So 2 of those sugar molecules connected. And then down here, I've got a picture of a polysaccharide. Notice I've got a bunch of these sugar molecules here. And this is just like a snapshot of the entire like huge gigantic molecule. So there would be a ton on top of this as well. So again, carbohydrates are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, specifically sugar molecules, which are 5 to 6 carbon rings with alcohols on them. A monosaccharide would just be 1 of them, a disaccharide would be 2, and a polysaccharide would be 3. So one thing I need you to feel comfortable doing is looking at a picture of one of these and telling me which one it is. So in order to make a disaccharide, actually what happens is 2 monosaccharides react together. So you bring 2 monos and they react and they create a disaccharide. They do this through something called a condensation reaction. At least for me, when I hear the word condensation, I think of water. And that's what this has to deal with. So if you look here, these are my 2 monosaccharides. Okay, so notice just 1 sugar molecule, 1 carbon ring with OHs, another carbon ring with OHs. And what happens is an H and an OH come off of the structures. So an H and an OH, or in other words, 2 H's and an O, is the water. Here it is over here too. So the OH and the H pop off, it goes and makes water, and then the O that's left over goes and bonds with the other monosaccharide. So we call this a condensation reaction. So in order to make these more complicated saccharides, these individual monosaccharides react together, also making water. And then the opposite of this reaction is actually called a hydrolysis reaction. And that's actually what our body does. So when you consume a polysaccharide or a disaccharide, your body actually has to break it down in order to absorb it. So it actually needs to be in its monosaccharide form for our body to use and digest it. So if your body digests a disaccharide, it does hydrolysis, breaks it apart, and basically just does the opposite of this reaction. So condensation reactions are how these are made, and hydrolysis reactions are how these are broken down. And our body does the breaking down, so then we can absorb the monosaccharides. So here's just a quick list of some really common sugars. And remember, when I'm saying the word sugars here, I'm specifically talking about carbohydrates. So sugars is an all-encompassing word for carbohydrates. So some monosaccharide examples that I want to refer to specifically are glucose and fructose. Again, these are probably words you've heard before. Glucose is referred to as blood sugar. So when somebody's referring to their blood sugar levels, specifically like if they're diabetic or something like that, they're specifically referring to their glucose levels. And basically what this is it's a measurement of how many glucose molecules are in your bloodstream. Eventually, for the most part, I'm simplifying this, but for the most part, all carbohydrates break down into glucose. And glucose is energy for your cells. So when you're measuring your blood sugar levels, you're basically measuring how much energy is readily available for your body. So if your blood sugar is low, you're going to feel fatigued and weak because you're not providing your body with a lot of energy. And if you've got a high blood sugar, then you've got a ton of energy at the ready. Fructose, another one you've probably heard of. That is fruit sugar. So fructose actually occurs naturally in all fruits, and fructose to our palate is incredibly sweet. So for example, sucrose down here, which is an example of a disaccharide, Notice it's composed of fructose and glucose. So the reason that sucrose, the stuff in our pantry, tastes really sweet is because of the presence of fructose. That's why apples are sweet and raspberries and blueberries and all these fruits, since they have that natural fructose, that natural fruit sugar, that's what makes it really sweet. And you've probably heard of high fructose corn syrup, right? So that is actually a variation on sucrose that has more fructose than normal, and it's made from corn, which also has fructose in it. And high fructose corn syrup is actually a lot sweeter on our palate than regular sugar, which is why you might taste a difference if something's made with high fructose corn syrup or regular sugar. It's that sweetness factor. Another one is lactose. This is milk sugar. So this is a naturally occurring sugar that is in all milk products and dairy products. And actually what's really interesting, and we'll kind of talk about this more as we move on, is all of these saccharides, especially the disaccharides, our body processes the same. So if you're drinking a glass of milk, or if you're drinking lemonade, for example, which has sugar in it, the sucrose and the lactose, our body kind of treats similarly, which is interesting, even though they taste different and they come from different sources. So those are some common disaccharides you probably have heard about. And then polysaccharides here, like starch and cellulose. Starchy things like potatoes or breads, those come from plants, and cellulose is specifically plant fiber. And that is specifically dietary fiber. So whenever a food is listing the amount of dietary fiber, it's actually listing the amount of cellulose that's in that food. And cellulose, if you remember, is actually what plant cell walls are made out of. So when you're eating plant products, the cellulose is that plant cell wall, and that's actually what dietary fiber is. So these are just some common things that you've probably heard about or seen. And now you specifically know if they're a monosaccharide, a disaccharide, or a polysaccharide. And again, based on if it's mono, di, or poly, our body treats it differently. So I already touched on this a little bit, but I want to just emphasize how important glucose is. So like I said, glucose is what blood sugar is. So when you hear people talking about blood sugar levels, they're really just talking about glucose levels. And if you remember way back in the day, I'm talking about photosynthesis and cellular respiration in biology, glucose is that main molecule that we're talking about. So photosynthesis of plants makes glucose, and then cellular respiration with our cells uses glucose as energy. So glucose is vital for our survival. And that's why whenever we eat foods that have carbohydrates in them, the main thing that we're getting out of that is glucose, which is really important for our cells to function and our cells to thrive. So the two disaccharides I was talking about, sucrose and lactose. So like I said, sucrose is table sugar. So this is the stuff that we put in sweets, and they're delicious. And like I said, sucrose is really sweet to our palate due to the fact that there's fructose in it. Where lactose, if you look, doesn't have any fructose in it, and that's why milk doesn't really taste sweet to us. But here's what's interesting. So let's say you have a pixie stick. Okay, you got a lot of sugar. Notice that this molecule is moderately simple, right? It's just two sugar molecules. And like I said, we need to have monosaccharides in our system in order to be absorbed into our bloodstream and then to be used as energy. So your body does that one hydrolysis reaction, and this is instantly broken down and can instantly be used as energy. This is really easy for our body to break down because it's just one disaccharide. So that's why you hear things like sugar highs and things like that. Because if you eat a lot of these disaccharides, you're providing your body with instant energy. And if that energy doesn't get used, it's stored as fat for later. Because your body doesn't necessarily know when it's going to get its next meal. So if you're providing your body with this really fast, instant energy and it's not being used, your body then takes this energy and stores it for later, just in case. So this is why eating really sugary foods can give you that sugary high and can sometimes not be as good for your health due to how simple this molecule is. Where on the other hand, these polysaccharides, which are made up of hundreds and hundreds of these monosaccharides, these are super big, long, complicated structures. These take a really long time for our body to break down and decompose. So these are longer sources of energy. So if you've ever heard of the concept of carbing up, for example, you're eating a lot of these heavy starchy foods, bread, pasta, things like that, and you're providing your body with a longer outsource of energy rather than the instant energy that those disaccharides provide. And something like cellulose, our bodies don't even break down. And that's why cellulose helps you poop, because it stays within your system and helps coat it. Polysaccharides, long source of energy. Disaccharides, short use of energy.